Welcome back to our ninth episode of Mindset Monday. Today, Dr. Chandra and I will be developing our mindsets on the principles of nutrition and aspects of nutrition for American society. How does our food interact with stress and society? And importantly, how can we become, as today's fantastic guest speaker, Stephanie Pazniokas points out, the CEO, COO, and CSO of your body? A little background about Stephanie. She's a neuroscientist and biochemist turned health and wellness coach, and her passion is to help busy women battling with disease take back control of their own health with simple nutrition and lifestyle-based strategies. She helps women who've tried it all and worry that their situation is hopeless become the boss of their health. Stephanie's scientifically proven neuroscience-based boss mode framework is the key to her clients' success. Stephanie is the founder of SJP Health and Wellness based in Boston, but serves women across the world through virtual programs. We're so happy to have you, Stephanie.
I'm happy to be here. I'm excited. I love these opportunities.
Wonderful. So, a little bit about your background. We've seen that you've done some amazing and impactful work. Can you talk a little bit about your background as a scientist and what got you into this coaching work?
Yeah, so this is a life story, really. So I'll try to keep it compact. But I actually started out undergrad majoring in psychobiology with a minor in biochemistry. And the reason is that I really always hated this idea of this mind-body dualism, and it never made sense to me. You have these two schools, the medicators and the therapists for mental health, but what about the body as a whole, the person as a whole? And after having taken college biology in high school and while taking psychology at the same time, I felt there was a serious disconnect. I'm sitting there in high school going, can you guys talk to each other, please? And so I actually, when I was applying for colleges, I was specifically looking for, this is back in 93, for programs that were either biopsychology, psychobiology, or something. And this was a fledgling field at the time. So there weren't very many programs out there, but I did find one, a couple, and I applied. So I wanted to understand the biological basis of behavior. So delving into biology, psychology, biochemistry, cellular biology in a program that is designed to look into the whole body, it becomes clear that what we experience in our mind and emotions is inextricably linked to our physical body. It just is. And that led me into focusing on the brain in graduate school for my master's degree in neuroscience. Specifically, I was in a neuroplasticity lab. So we were looking at learning and memory, human cognition, but I was also, looking at how, how cells respond, how neurons respond to different stimuli, right? So that's the neuroplasticity part. So whether it was a visual cortex or prefrontal cortex or whatever, we were looking at those areas. Then life leads us in various directions, right? So I was there for a while. And then after I got married and I had my first child, I decided to stay at home a bit and take care of what became two children. I made their food from scratch and I tried to give them the best start that I could, but their dad left when they were very young. I went back to work in the life science industry, and it was a very rewarding yet stressful time for me because I was traveling all the time. I sometimes, like every other week, 2 days to 14 days. It varied. Very interesting work. I got to work in some of the top cardiology labs in the country. I went to military. I went to NIH. I did lots of different things, and it was very exciting, but I was trying to raise a family. And while I knew a lot of stuff, I wasn't actually applying my knowledge to myself as much as I did when I was going through pregnancy. So I let the lure of convenience and business expenses. Hey, I can eat whatever restaurant I want to eat. I gotta expense it. I let that take over my good sense. And as a result of the combined stress, my poor sleep while I was traveling, raising now 3 small children because I had gotten remarried, the loss of my non-work social network, right? And connection to my community due to my schedule, because it was very difficult when I was actually home. I had so much to catch up on and so much to focus on inside. I lost my community. And I was also making very poor food choices. Now, I thought they were okay. I was, following conventional wisdom, the food pyramid and balanced meals, right? I thought I was doing the right thing, but with all of that, I actually became obese with pre-diabetes. Diabetes is very rampant on my mother's side. So, and I hadn't really thought about why, I was focused on other things. I had high blood pressure. My legs were swelling during traveling. I couldn't stand for a long time. I had joint, back, and jaw pain. I was only 38 years old. Wow. And I was so sick. And I have this wonderful neighbor, and she's like, well, let's do something together. And she had the opposite problem I did, but God bless her, because you need people in your life to help you make these hard changes. I was in such a depressed way that the thought of putting any effort into anything was overwhelming. I ended up changing jobs, which actually helped me with the energy I needed to kind of make a bigger change. But at the time, I tried going the route of established programs, eat less, but not really differently, move more paradigm. And that had me actually stressing my body and brain a lot, because I wasn't changing the kind of food I was eating. I wasn't eating enough, and I was exercising 7 days a week. Wow. Right. So my body was like, what are you doing to me? I was so irritable. I lost weight, but that is the yo-yo diet methodology. When you lose weight in that way, it's bad for your body. It's bad for your metabolism. And so from the age of 39 to 43, I was regaining 35 pounds of the 45 pounds I had lost, just up and down and up and down. And so I had to stop. And then I thought to myself, what am I doing? I did my research. I was like, wait, I'm a scientist like me. What am I doing? Listening to all this other stuff. Obviously, it's not working. I went back to my science roots, what I knew about the body, energy, and more. And I said, I did this all wrong. Why was I listening to conventional wisdom that has been failing everybody for so long? Why was I outsourcing my health to something else? Why wasn't I owning me, being the boss of my health, taking responsibility for me? Nobody else can do that. So I started going down the non-conventional path. I discovered what worked for me, and I have been doing that ever since. So I actually found homeostasis, my own, balance throughout my body. And that allowed everything, including my weight, to normalize. See, weight isn't the problem. It's just a symptom, right, of being out of balance, things going haywire. So the biggest thing I noticed actually when all that happened wasn't my weight. Yeah, that's great. But my energy was so high. Like, spending time at work, being able to do all the things that were being required of me became so much easier because my body had energy. And I can't explain what it feels like to go from where I was in, like, really feeling at the dregs at the bottom of a well, like energy wise, to having energy. And I actually talk a lot more about that than I ever talk about weight, because it changes everything. So yeah, so I've been actually quite stable for 5 years. I'm just rock solid. And that's without ever having really dieted. I just changed what I ate, right, when I ate it. I don't count calories, right? When and how I moved, how I managed my stress, how I slept, and making sure that I pay attention to my community and my social network and my friends. And health isn't just food and exercise. Like, that's a myth, right? So when things went sideways, so how did I get from there into coaching? So I went from a scientist, then I had my own personal experience. And I think that when anybody ends up in a space similar to me, it's coming out of their own pain. Right. We're trying to help people navigate something that we understand ourselves. And I think that's really important when I'm working with somebody. They understand that I understand. It's not an absolute requirement, but I think it makes things easier. So what happened is my mom ended up getting diagnosed with cancer. And my daughter was also going through some health issues. She's actually not food motivated. She moved out on her own and actually became functionally anorexic. So she was having a huge amount of problems, and she was having a very difficult time eating. And she had all of the symptoms that came along with that, even though it had nothing to do with her body image. Right. She just literally forgot to eat. Wow. And didn't plan for it and stuff. So I have my mom on one side who's got over like 5 of the major, illnesses, chronic, so she had COPD, fibromyalgia, she had cancer, she had sleep apnea, she was pre-diabetic, she was very overweight. And then she, like I said, she ended up with a small cell lung cancer. And I'm now having to take care of them, but I was working at a startup company, which was a lot of time and stress. And I had to stop and say, I obviously can't take care of them and myself and do this job. And I kind of got forced into a little bit of a midlife crisis, I suppose. What is my purpose? What is my passion? What do my own unique experiences equip me to do? And the things that they were going through, my mom and my daughter, were both ultimately related to their relationship with food and their lifestyles. I had gone through my experience. And that led me to saying, the most important, our wealth is our health, right? You don't have anything, I saw my mom throw her life away and literally sit in a chair for the last 20 years of her life, practically, before she ever got cancer. And it's sad. So I pursued a precision nutrition health coaching certification. I also received my culinary nutrition expert certification. I combined that with my knowledge of the body and neuroscience to bring a non-diet method of sustainable, energetic health lifestyle change to those who are ready to give up on themselves. And I actually do work with both men and women, but it's usually women who find me, right? So that's kind of my story. That's as nutshell as it gets, I suppose.
Beautiful, meaningful story that is packed with so much. It's so rich, and I think it must, a lot of it probably resonates with, people listening. So, thank you. Thanks so much for sharing.
Beautiful story. I just have to say, it's really touching that not only are you helping people, but you also come from a point of understanding. And I loved what you said about the myth that health is just about food and exercise, because thinking that that's just what it is stops people from, I think, honestly, can stop people from really diving into creating their own personalized plan for their health. So, Dr. Chandra and I both agreed that there's a lot of information, again, on what we should be eating and what we shouldn't be eating. And there are various models of nutrition, belief systems, and rigorous diets that people follow, such as paleo, keto, intermittent fasting. So, what do you think is true or not about these practices? And is the key really moderation?
This is such a loaded question, and it's none and all of what you just said. So let me I'm going to do my best to answer all of that stepwise. So first, I really look at what the fundamentals are of our biological health. That's the underpinning also of our cognitive and emotional health. This is all connected. You can't have a thought without the neurotransmitters in your brain and your physical neurons, right? If you don't have what you need in your body to make those neurons and make those neurotransmitters, and then it's not going to work right? So we can't create something from nothing. 100% of who we are physically comes from the food we eat. So that is the fundamental foundation to everything else. It's not the only thing. Like I said, it's not just food. It's not just exercise. There's a number of things that go into it because we are complex. But if you don't have good supplies, you're going to be coming in at a disadvantage. So the question really becomes, as when it comes to paleo, keto, vegan, vegetarian, pescatarian, flexitarian, Mediterranean, like honestly, the list goes on. There's so many nutritarian. There are so many Aryans, like as far as the kinds of foods my mind blows. And you ask, why is that? The question I have is, does that way of eating promote and support the fundamental principles of health, right? For you. Mm-hmm. We're all different. So for example, does that way of eating promote focus on whole foods and a serious reduction of processed, especially ultra-processed industrial formulated foods? If a program you're looking at, it says, here's a whole bunch of processed foods for you to incorporate and make and eat and mix. Here's a pill, potion, and powder for you to move forward. Then I'm going to step back and be a little bit curious about that. Is that really a lifestyle, right? What is it really giving you for building blocks? So I feel like no matter what type of way of eating you're looking for, you really want it to be supportive of what our body requires at a cellular level. You know, it's not about a belief system. You can believe something all you want, your body needs what it needs, right? So if this is the case, you know, if so, that it's focused on whole foods and not industrial formulated foods, then most of these ways of eating can work for someone. In fact, they all work for some people, but none work for all people, right? The reason is that we are all unique genetically, ancestrally, geographically, experientially. You know, the experiences our body had in childhood and now, and where we're starting from a health status standpoint, geographically, what is in our environments that our body, you know, my family has been in this area of the country in New England since the 1600s. Oh. So there is a lot that I inherit from that in my immune system from generation to generation to generation to generation. If I suddenly moved to California or Hawaii, I might not do as well. Simply for the fact that geographically, I have a history here, right? But a lot of people don't think about that, but it's a thing. So, you know, we are all unique for all of those reasons. It's not just genetics. It's not just, you know, our ancestors, and where they came from geographically, but it's our current geographical experience. So genetically, we do all have genetic weak links. Nobody has the perfect genome. So when those are perturbed by lifestyle or experience, they get triggered. And the same lifestyle or experience can trigger different things in different people. In one person, it might be Alzheimer's, and another person, it might be diabetes, and another person, it may be heart disease. There are some things that are fundamental enough that they may affect people the same way, you know, gut health or metabolic syndrome or some things like that. But, you know, one person might get a neurodegenerative disease where I may get type 2 diabetes, right? From the same triggers, because we have different weak links. So that's actually good news, because it means you can do a lot of the same things and heal lots of different things by bringing the body into balance and focusing on what your body needs to shore up whatever those weak links are. Now, there is a little bit more to it, but that's a whole other episode.
Yeah. It sounds like you're saying that the body needs energy and needs to avoid foods which might make it ill. And for each person, it depends, you know, kind of on their genetics, and there are lots of things it depends on, but really food is for energy. And we need to make sure that we're avoiding
energy and building blocks, nutrients, energy, you know, protein, your body doesn't primarily use that for energy, right? But it's actually a building block of everything. So there's, you know, yes. So there's also, you were asking about these other diets. There's epigenetics, where our environment, by what we eat, the toxins we might be exposed to, emotional stressors, those types of triggers, they can cause certain genes to turn on or off, right? They can cause our mitochondria to switch from energy to production to cellular defense. And then we're not getting our energy because our body is trying to protect itself. There are certain types of foods that we eat today that gunk up the works and cause problems like leaky gut and gut dysbiosis that will absolutely affect what we can eat, right? So that, at least until we hear and can heal, right, and can reintroduce things, if we don't have an allergy or whatnot. Experience, right? If you weren't breastfed, or if you were breastfed, if you were born by cesarean or natural, if you've had severe constipation as a child, these are all risk factors for problems with gut microbiome in the future, and that can absolutely affect what food you can or cannot eat. So when we go back to this idea of what's the right diet for people, experience matters, right? What's your history? If you are suffering from pancreatitis, or if you don't have a gallbladder, if you have diverticulitis, you have a current status that's going to influence how you have to first approach a healing lifestyle before dialing into your healthy lifestyle. So they aren't the same, right? If I break an arm, I have to use a cast for a while, but if I keep the cast on, I'm going to lose the use of my arm long-term. Like, you can't wear a cast forever. So I think of it in that way. Now we get into that ancestral part. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but some people can eat Mediterranean. Others can't have that many legumes. There are some people who do much better on a high fish diet or on a primarily carnivorous diet. There are some better with mostly veggies and a little bit of meat. from what we know, there really are no truly herbivorous humans. We have the technology to support herbivorous humans using artificial supplements. So if someone chooses to be an herbivore for any reason, we can support that choice with technology. But generally speaking, from a biological standpoint, and I don't have a belief system with this thought. You know, I'm not trying to say to anybody, well, you're wrong for any particular thing. It's just biologically what we require. We require some animal nutrients, even if it's limited to eggs or dairy, to get what our body needs, right? B12. There's, you know, there are different ways to get different things, but, you know, and when we talk about, you know, bioavailability, you know, and those types of things, but we can certainly work around that nowadays. Now we get into the question, well, would I say it's about moderation? Well, no, because right, some people won't tolerate certain foods. So it's not like what's moderation? If I ate a moderate amount of bread and pasta, I'd still be sick. I don't tolerate that very, very well, because my mother's side of the family, I mean, honestly, it's like we look at refined carbohydrates and get diabetes. I don't know. We're very, very sensitive to it, as I discovered personally. My mom, you know, has had 4 grandparents, and all of them had their legs amputated. There were 8 legs, nobody had them, right? This is how severe diabetes my mom had, my aunts had it, everybody, right? So moderate for me is a very small amount. Am I legalistic about it? I'm not celiac, so no, I'm not. I can on occasion have some things. But it's just easier for me to make better choices. Like I'd rather have a whole sprouted grain bread if I'm going to have something like that. If someone has no ability to break down lactose, is there a moderate amount of milk that they can have, right? So it's not so much about moderation. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about that in another, you know, a little bit in the future. But rather than think about moderation, I really think it's about discovering what is best for you individually, right? I mainly have an issue with the diet mentality, and it's very strict and rigorous with rules. And I think this imparts an unhealthy stress that works against the results we're ultimately trying to get. So I've been there, done that. I think we're much better off slowly and surely making better choices and changing our lifestyle habits to support our unique self, and having grace for ourselves, treating everything as data. It's information. There's no failure. There's learning, right? It's this mindset around food, and being open and willing to learn what is best for you. And it's going to be unique. You're going to be able to pull from all different kinds of things, but it's going to be something you can discover. And with regards to intermittent fasting or fasting, I do actually think that's the one universal requirement. I know that sounds, you know, difficult for people, especially when we've been told, oh my gosh, you have to eat, you have to eat. I mean, I think food's been pushed on me my whole entire life. You have to eat. You can't skip a meal. You can't. But there are certain mechanisms in our body that are absolutely key to longevity and health and energy that are only activated when we're not eating. If we don't do it, then really diseased and poor functioning cells and organelles do build up over time. And interestingly, if you look at various religions around the world, you'd be hard pressed to find one that didn't incorporate fasting. In fact, Ansel Keys' study of the 7 countries, which a lot of people say, oh, this is the reason why we have to have the low-fat diet. When he was seeing all of this great benefit of the Mediterranean diet, he neglected to account for the fact that most of the citizens were Greek Orthodox who practiced some level of fasting for half the year. And when he was doing his study, it was like over 180 days of fasting that they were doing. Wow. So that was an extremely confounding variable. And you really just can't, now you can't look at those results without considering that.
There's another common belief that what our ancestors ate influences us and how ethnicity might actually shape our diet. Is this true?
Yes. And there's so much to say here, but we're all human. Our DNA is very, very similar, but there is diversity built in, right? We have the ability to adapt to our environments, and this happens very slowly over time. For example, changes in our food in the last 50 years have zero genetic influence on anyone living right now. That's not the time scale we're talking about. Ancestrally is thousands of years, really, in the end. But anyway, we have regions of the world, for example, where an enzyme that exists in babies to break down lactose persists into adulthood, and other areas where that does not persist into adulthood. Originally, that enzyme, lactase, shut off. That gene shut off, and adults did not consume milk and dairy. They didn't tolerate it. However, there are areas that have developed this persistence of that enzyme, that gene coding that enzyme. And the reason for this is because in some areas of the world, at certain times, the only nourishment available was animal milk and dairy. And in times of famines, the adults who could metabolize lactose survived better, right? And so that gene started persisting in those areas of the world, but not others. For example, Northern European versus China, right? Asians don't have that. So we talk about, oh, lactose intolerance. Well, let's look at your ancestry, right? Another example is the amylase enzyme. That's what's in our saliva that helps us break down starches into simple sugar molecules. So which is what our body, one of the sources of energy for our body. Well, let's go back again. In Northern European countries where there are few starches available ancestrally, they're very seasonal growing season. They weren't heavy agrarian societies. The growing season is very short. So they had only fresh fruits and vegetables at very limited times of the year, otherwise had to preserve them or ferment them. And it only lasted for so long, right? Because they didn't have refrigerators. They ate more fish, meat, and dairy. From a genetic perspective, they have maybe 2 to 4 copies of the amylase gene, and you can have anywhere from 2 to like 18 to 20 now. I've seen actually a study that showed 20. I'm one of those. In high school, was it high school or 7th grade? I don't remember. We did this little experiment where you suck on a little oyster cracker. It's all starch. And everybody was supposed to write down, do a timer and write down when it tasted sweet to them. And it was an example of the amylase enzyme in our mouths, changing the starch into sugar. It was a great experiment. It never got sweet for me.
Wow.
Okay. This would be an example of why my family has such high rates of diabetes. I am one of those people. My family is prone to diabetes from insulin resistance. And it turns out that my blood sugar spikes much higher when I eat refined grains and starches than when I eat straight sugar. And that's been shown. There's a number of studies out there that have been actually looking really closely into this. And that seems counterintuitive. You mean if you can't break it down, your blood sugar spikes higher, but you're not making sugar? It actually does work that way. So it's very counterintuitive. But that's what the studies are showing us. And we're also seeing that pan out in the rates of diabetes in those with those genes. So those from grain eating societies that more agrarian, they tend to have more than 14 copies. So or a higher number. So they do much better with grains and starches than they do with sugar and sweets. So I was talking to one of my friends. One of my first clients was actually in India, and she was talking about, we're just talking about how there's been such a ballooning or increase all of a sudden in heart disease and diabetes in that country. And I think there are 2 reasons for that. One, the shifting from ghee to vegetable oil. And the other is now you've got these concessions, like these little refrigerated concessions with chocolate, like all kinds of candy, right? Things that weren't necessarily part of the ancestral diet. And so now they're having sugar where their genetics don't support that pure sugar, right? So a number of things here. So that's an important aspect of ancestral, understanding your ancestry. So if I think we were to pick something that is a true guiding star for everyone, it would really be the incredible work of Weston A. Price. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he wrote a book called Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. He was a dentist originally, and he traveled around the world. He was studying indigenous societies because they didn't have bad teeth. Yet theoretically, they didn't have nearly the level of nutrition and food status that was in the Western world. And so he actually did the last study before indigenous people really were corrupted and overcome by Western eating and the availability of food. And so his data is absolutely amazing. And he was looking at their traditional diets. And if you take that book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, and you couple that with the book Nourishing Traditions, you're going to be able to dial in on the best diet for you from an ancestral standpoint. And this can get dicey, right? We're an increasing melting pot. Maybe there's moderation available for children of a Northern European and Asian or African couple because they maybe have a moderate amount of amylase, right? So maybe they can have a moderate amount of certain types of foods, right? So it gets very, very interesting as, you know, we have much more diversity in our own ancestral lines. One thing I can say regarding the ancestral diets is that high heat hexane clarified seed and bean oils are not in any traditional diet ever. They've wreaked havoc with our health. Large amounts of refined sugar and carbohydrate has never been part of an ancestral diet. Chemical flavorings have never been part of an ancestral diet. Food coloring, you know, has not been a part. Our bodies have not yet adapted to any of these things. They're causing a lot of inflammatory-based illnesses. Our cells can't use those as building blocks. That's like using styrofoam instead of steel to build a skyscraper. It doesn't, I don't want to be in that building. Really poor building blocks for our bodies. And if you look at some really interesting studies, like the 195 country study, amongst some others, you find that what is really behind the top 10 causes of death is one thing. It's ultra processed foods that are industrially formulated, nutrient poor, really stripped, and sometimes fortified with lab created versions of nutrients, not in their normal proportions in nature, not with their normal co-nutrients or co-vitamins. And they have a very high energy density with sugars and damaged fats, and have sodium out of balance with other electrolytes. I hesitate to call this food. This non-food accounts for over 65% of the calories that adults eat and over 73% of what adolescents eat. And I think when we, and that's all over the world. You can look at studies from Brazil, you can look at studies from Mexico, you can look at studies from America. These numbers are very high everywhere where disease is ballooning. So when we think about, go back to our question about, well, which dietary system, you know what, do paleo, do keto,
either way,
do whatever works,
but not
don't eat real food, right? And then we can figure out which real food works for you, right? Because the thing is you need to stop doing damage first. The first thing anybody needs to do, I had talk about 6 simple shifts of health. The first thing you need to do is stop doing damage. If I try to, say my house is on fire, put out the fire, we start rebuilding it. But if somebody's going back and setting fires as I'm repairing things, I'm never going to get anywhere, right? So you can be working really hard to change your food and to to eat less, or to move more, or to sleep better, or whatever. But if you're just still throwing those Molotov cocktail bombs into your house, you're not going to make any progress. So the first thing you need to do is stop doing damage. So I'm really just about, let's figure out ways to choose better incrementally. You know, change takes time, but that's, I think, the most important thing. Those things are not ancestral. Our bodies just don't know what to do with them.
Oh, well said.
And so you talked a little bit about the industrialized, the chemicals, the foods that are the chemicals that are added to our non-processed foods. So when thinking about food, we need to consider that the systems of food supply were not designed for people, but designed for the people who are making them. And Dr. Chandra and I were reflecting a little bit about this. But Dr. Chandra, can you talk a little bit about the history of the 1992 USDA food pyramid?
Yeah, so I mean, I may not know this as well as Stephanie does, but what I can say is I understand that this was corrupted. So 1992, the USDA came up with a food pyramid that recommended 6 to 11 servings of breads and cereals, and I think also prioritized dairy, prioritized meat, maybe at the expense of fruits and vegetables, and that it sounds like a lot of lobbying went into it. And I think before the food pyramid in 1990 or so, there was maybe only one state in the country that had over 20% obesity, rate of obesity, and that was Mississippi. And then I think 20 years afterwards, almost all states did over 20%. So it seemed like the food industrial complex really wanted people to consume processed foods. Foods like you mentioned, Stephanie, that are engineered for taste, for shelf life, for appearance. A lot of taste tests are done by food groups, by companies that are making foods to figure out what chemicals will make the food more palatable, tastier, and functionally addictive. And so it seems like we can't stop eating these foods. I mean, your story really resonated with me because I ate exactly what I wanted to till my early 30s, and then started getting constipated and feeling ill. And then also started to look at what I should be eating. And then as a doctor, patients asked me, what should I eat? And I was like, I'm not sure. So I started to study it.
Right.
Nutrition is taught in only 20% of medical schools. But it certainly seems like we have been just what's available, is often unhealthy. And that's why 65%, why the 65% and 73% numbers around the world are happening. Because, there's been a shift in how food is produced and disseminated or given to people. And I'll make one last point, then I'll open up to you, Stephanie. I have a cousin who lived in Germany for many years, and she said that she moved back maybe a year ago. So she was living in Germany with her husband. And she said, we had only a small fridge. We basically went out to the market to get our food for every meal. We would decide what we wanted, for each meal, just go to the market, get it, cook it or slice it and eat it. And we didn't have to, store much at all. And now she said, coming back to the US, we pretty much have to go to the grocery store and buy a lot of things and keep them in our fridge. And, it's just, she didn't like the change. So, it seems like our food is, often has a long shelf life, is heavily processed. A lot of what's in the supermarket is not good for us. They say sort of eat around the edges, go to the edges of the supermarket. That's where the fresher food is. Whereas the foods in the aisles, are often in boxes, in cans. They've been there for a while. So wondering if you can talk a little bit about our food supply, how industrial it is, and how that has led most of us to eat like you described.
Yeah. So interestingly, there's a couple of really good books here, especially Sugar, Salt, Fat by Michael Moss and Death by Food Pyramid by Denise Minger. So Denise Minger actually touches on the science, the politics, and the sociology all in one book, and very, very good read. So that's the one that I would say is the most consumable.
Yeah.
But Sugar, Salt, Fat, it's amazing. So Michael Moss goes into a huge amount of detail on the industrial side of it, some science too, but there's literally a formula. Frito-Lay has a formula about how to design their food and whether or not it's something that ever gets sold. And it's a constant, you think about a pharmaceutical company and they're always testing different drugs, and then some make it through. They do the same thing in food labs.
Yeah.
They come up with all different kinds of things and finally engineer a food. And it has to, it's absolutely crazy. You were talking about the food pyramid. So there was a lot of political aspects of that. So it's not just the lobbying. Grains are subsidized by the US government. So those farms actually get money. And because they get the money, they have to use the money to grow the food. We end up with this huge surplus. And the original food pyramid was done by a different department, and it had vegetables at the bottom, like vegetables. But because of the situation in America at the time and war and this and that, and the starting up of food benefits, they said we can't afford to give people vegetables, but technically grains and wheat, those are technically vegetables. So why don't we put that at the bottom instead? And then we'll have a place to use all this food.
Wow.
Right. And then the next one up was like vegetables. And then you've got your dairy and your meat, and and then up the very top, you have your fats, and you have this low fat diet. So a super low fat diet is actually really, really not good for your eyes, your brain, your skin, your mood. So a lot of mental health problems come in with a very low fat diet and a high carbohydrate diet. Right. So the food pyramid is actually, honestly, if somebody sat down and said, well, what's the best way to make everybody diseased? They would have come up with the food pyramid. And the funny thing is that their justification for putting all those grains at the bottom was because, hey, in Africa, in certain areas of the world, they eat all that primarily. Well, that's not most Americans. Most Americans are not. So now we get back to that ancestral thing. That might be okay for some small populations in the world, and they may thrive in that area, but not most. And especially once it becomes refined, whole grains and sprouted grains are a completely different thing, and can be super healthy. So that's where we get. So there's even more. There was a lot of scientific fighting and winning at the time. So there were these hypotheses. Heart disease was starting to come about, right? And if you look, it actually really tracks well with a couple of things, mostly the richness of society. But oils and non-animal fat oils started to become on the rise, and cottonseed oil was introduced, but also refined sugars and carbohydrates. So it was really hard at the time to discern what was going on. You had two different people, two different scientists. They were like this with each other. One said, oh, it's fat. One said, oh, it's sugar. And the fat guy had all the connections in the government.
Oh, well.
The guy who was interested in fat, and he was extremely charismatic.
The low-fat diet is what predominated after that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so we have all of this myth surrounding fat. And so now you get into Nina Teicholz's book, Big Fat Surprise. And she had this an amazing book. And it really goes into even what Harvard has recently admitted, which was, may have been wrong about the fat thing. Oops. Right. And so it's really about eating the right fats.
Right.
And healthy fats, and you really shouldn't skim too much on them. And I don't say that as saying, oh, well, then go out and eat your French fries. No. That's not what I'm saying at all. Don't eat your old fried foods. There is a way to do this well. And so that's kind of what I would say about that. Those are three books that I would highly recommend. Sugar, Salt, Fat, and Big Fat Surprise are big books, and you have to really be into it to get. Big Fat Surprise was really good. But if you want to get the summary of basically both of those in one, Death by Food Pyramid is great. It's hilarious. So it really keeps you going, because she's also humorous, but she did a really fantastic job. And I think that's probably a great place to start. I would recommend that book to everybody, along with Nourishing Traditions, I would think, so that you can dial in on what may be best for you.
Ask you, just as a follow-up to that, you mentioned good fats. Would you tell us a few foods that you would consider, as offering good fats? I assume avocados, eggs, are these?
Avocados, eggs, olives, right? So, and like everything in coconut, even though it's a saturated fat, it has a lot of medium chain triglycerides in it. It actually doesn't have the same effect in our bodies as some others. But I mean, honestly, tallow and lard, those aren't bad either, depending on what you have. And it's just the amount you have, and making sure you have a variety of fats. Because, for example, when I was eating a low-fat diet, my triglycerides were very high. My HDL was in the floor. It was horrible. I actually, for me, what works for me is when I think works for most people is just getting rid of refined and industrial foods, period, end of story. But I don't worry about fat. I don't count how much fat I eat. I cook with avocado oil, olive oil. I have some coconut oil. I have grass-fed butter. If I make myself a pastured, forested pork belly, I render some of that lard, and I'll use that for higher heat cooking if I'm going to do it. But for the most part, I don't do a lot of high heat cooking, But my HDL is 67 and my triglycerides are 67. I've got a 1-to-1 ratio. Wow. There's no heart disease happening there. By all studies showing, especially for women, that's the most important predictor. That ratio is one of the most important predictors for heart disease. And it's so, and that's, and of course, my high blood pressure and all that sort of thing is gone. My fasting blood glucose level is 77.
Right.
And it wasn't like that all the time. Right. But good fats are really important for that. I mean, I had depression, I had anxiety, I had irritability, I had low energy, all of those things. It disappeared when I added fat into my diet. My satiety, so my snacking and my feeling like I constantly needed to eat, and my periods of hypoglycemia, which were severe, disappeared.
Wow.
Right. Eating enough protein, eating enough fat, having a large variety of vegetables, those are the most important things. A lot of people think that carbohydrates, as far as the starchy ones that turn into sugar, are an essential food group. Actually, there's no essential carbohydrate. You have essential proteins and amino acids, and you have essential fats, but there's no such thing as essential carbohydrate.
Nicely said.
All right. there are essential vitamins, and you can get those from veggies that don't have a huge number of carbohydrates. You can literally live that way. Now, is that necessarily the best thing for everybody? Not with somebody with a lot of amylase genes, right? They're going to have their sprouted grains, their sprouted lentils, sprouted legumes are great, right? You've got a really great balance of protein and starches, and a lower level of anti-nutrients that can bind up things. So there is a way for everybody to eat that optimally supports their body and their energy.
Can I also, just piggybacking on that, you have a wonderful micronutrients table that I've seen, which looks at sources of potassium, source of magnesium, of vitamin D, of vitamin E. Can you talk about good sources for micronutrients? And also, I wanted to add in fiber, because I think a lot of people are really fiber deficient.
They are fiber deficient. If you think that if 65% of your calories are coming from ultra processed food does not have fiber. They take it out because fiber reduces shelf life. So, and if you got to think about if bacteria isn't wanting to grow on your food, it's not food. It's not food for you either.
That's right.
Right? That bacteria and fungus, that eats everything. Those are our decomposers, right? If something doesn't want to eat it, you probably might want to think twice, just as a general rule of thumb. Yeah. So, yes. So, and this is a tough question. There are a lot of people who are, vegetarian or vegan or whatever, but a lot of these, so your potassium, magnesium, a lot of those are going to be found in your vegetables. Interestingly, everybody thinks banana for potassium, but that's not the best source of potassium. Avocados are a fantastic sourse of potassium. Edamame is a great source of potassium, and it's a young soybean, so it doesn't have as many, phytates in it. And again, if you sprout them, it's even better, but they're young. So there's all this controversy around soy. I don't mind edamame. And if you're going to have soy other than that, it probably should be fermented, but details. So your vegetables are going to have a lot of those minerals, but interestingly enough, for a lot of those other vitamins, especially the fat soluble vitamins, nature gives us the fat soluble vitamins that need to be used together, right? So vitamin D is going to come with vitamin K. It's going to come with vitamin A, right? And in animals, you're not getting the provitamin like beta carotene. Your body doesn't have to convert that vitamin A. You're getting the actual immediately bioavailable vitamin A, as opposed to from vegetables, where there's a whole family of provitamin A's, and beta carotene is only one of them, right? The carotenoids, there's so many, right, that they go together. So, so I would say salmon, but again, all of these things, you want to get good sources of them, right? Because yes, you can shop the outside of the store, but there are so many chemicals that they're exposed to if they're farmed, and versus, in conventional farming, and added antibiotics and artificial things to their diets, or being fed things that are contaminated with pesticides, and then the pesticides build up in those. So it's unfortunately, it's tough, right? So, but yes, eggs, yes, avocado, yes to liver. Liver is really healthy. It is probably, organ meats are probably the best multivitamin on the planet. You can get everything you need from them, and it's immediately bioavailable. If you think, what does your liver need? What's in your liver? You're going to get that from that organ, right? So it's interesting. I like to hide it in things, right? It's not the tastiest thing in the world, so I hide it. In other foods, or I'll just throw some in with when I'm making a bone broth, for example, and it'll just have some. You don't have to eat it. It's just part of the broth, and I use that to cook everything, right? So it's just hiding everywhere. Dark chocolate is actually really good. For vitamin D, if you've got mushrooms that are grown outside and in sunlight, they actually produce vitamin D. If they're grown on a farm inside without exposure to sunlight. So a lot of times people say, oh, like vitamin D, you can eat mushrooms. Yeah, only if they're grown under the right conditions. Sunlight converts into vitamin D in a mushroom just the same way sunlight would convert on our skin. A lot of times people will supplement with these fat soluble vitamins E, A, D, and K, just in a pill, but they do it at a time where they're not eating or whatnot. And if you're not eating fat when you're eating those, you're just going to get rid of them. You need fat for those vitamins to absorb. But optimally, vitamin D is more bioavailable in your body when you're having it with vitamin K, but they come packaged together, right, in nature. And magnesium, offset, especially magnesium is wonderful. I like taking it around 8 hours after, if I, my sun exposure in the morning, or if it's in the winter, I actually supplement with vitamin D. I had a really hard time keeping that up, and I had seasonal depression, and that has completely gone away since I've really focused on making sure that I have vitamin D through the winter. Right. My vitamin D was around 80.
Wow.
This winter.
That's great.
I had no issues. I don't get sick. I can't tell you the last time I got sick. I don't even know.
Wow.
Sneeze on me, I don't really get sick. And again, all this stuff goes together. When your body is functioning properly and your gut is healthy and you're getting all of these nutrients that you need, your body is perfectly capable of doing exactly what it's supposed to do.
What you said about the gut reminded me that you had taught me about tight junctions, that we have gut inflammation because of our sort of poor diet, and then it often becomes systemic inflammation because the gut is leaky. Wonder if you can talk briefly just about the importance of gut health.
Yeah. So actually, just recently, a new study was out again talking about soybean oil and linoleic acid, which is omega-6, and having such a high amount, and also these damaged fats, right? When we're creating oils that are high heat processed, hexane clarified, and they're damaged and they tend to oxidize easily. But it is shown that eating these types of oils actually damages the tight gut junctions in your gut. So the tight junctions in your gut are designed to only allow food, once it's broken down to its appropriate level of constituents, to pass through and to become nutrients in your body. And then, especially in your large intestine, that's where most of your bacteria are. They should not really be in your small intestine. That would be small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and that's not good. But in your large intestine, you've got bacteria, you've got, sometimes you've got larger food particles if you haven't broken them down all the way. That's supposed to stay and get waste eliminated. You also have certain hormones in your body, like estrogen. You want to keep things moving because you don't want to reabsorb those things or have it go back into your bloodstream. So when your tight junctions are damaged, what ends up happening is all the things that are supposed to be inside your intestines start getting into your bloodstream, whether it's a food particle, and you end up creating an allergy against that food because now it's big enough for your antibodies to recognize it. You've got pathogens that are coming from your gut into your bloodstream. So it activates your immune system. All of these things are activating your immune system and causing inflammation, right? And not only that, so oils, high omega-6 oils are one of the things that does that. Another thing that does that is glyphosate. So glyphosate is everywhere now. It's everywhere. It's in the water. It's everywhere. But it's primarily used on crops. It's Roundup, essentially. So we've got these GMO crops that are Roundup ready. So those GMO crops have been made GMO to be Roundup ready by inserting a bacterial gene called Bt toxin. So when you're eating food that has the glyphosate on it, like that is resistant to that, Bt toxin actually perforates your intestines and also causes leaky gut. So it's really important to stay away from GMO corn and those types of things because, if you have something like that, and I'll have a lot of it, and then you have high allergen foods, like, say you have a clam bake and you're having all of this like corn in there, and then, a classic New England clam bake or something like that. And then all of a sudden the next time you have clams, you're allergic. Like, why? How did that happen?
Oh, wow.
Because, right. So it's complicated, right? It's complicated. And I don't want people to be afraid of food.
Right.
We just have to know what food is causing damage and start avoiding that and start making better choices a little bit at a time. Because food is not our enemy. It is actually the thing that can give us our ultimate health. And again, there's more to it than just food. But if you're doing damage and you don't have the building blocks, that's the foundation of your house, right?
One maybe last point. I'm not sure we have too much more time, but this has been so meaningful. Can you talk about stress and sort of the effect that stress has on our food choices, and what can we do to kind of limit the damage that we do when we stress eat? I'm thinking last night I had a lot of patient notes. I was quite behind and had with me a cranberry loaf, which is basically cake. And I never do this, but I ate like a third of it and felt sick. And was like, why did I do this? I am so good at eating healthy. And I, I just don't feel well after eating this, but it's what I had. And I was stressed out. What can we do to, just prevent ourselves from doing a lot of, just causing ourselves trouble when we're stressed?
So before I actually answer the question, I actually want to speak to your situation that you had last night as a coach. Okay.
Right.
So you had the cake available. You probably would have been better off to have a handful of nuts.
Exactly.
Right? Yep. So first is being prepared, shaping your path. We talk about this a little later when we talk about the boss method, because I think we're going to get into a little bit of that before we go off. But you probably, because you were focusing on your work, there was stress, but you probably actually went a little bit too long, and maybe based on what you had earlier, your blood sugar got a bit too low. So now your body is, and it happened for two reasons, not just because what you ate, but the stress, and this I'm going to get into in just a moment, causes a release of cortisol and adrenaline, which increases your sugar in your blood so that you can run from the tiger.
Right.
And then you're going to have that crash, and then you're going to have to replace, right, that food. And so I'm actually, so what ended up happening is the classic stress, late night eating, carbohydrate, attack, and that's actually ultimately going to affect your sleep. So let me just take that. So I would have said the best thing to do in those situations is to be aware what your triggers are and be aware in those situations, and then set yourself up for success by saying, I'm going to make the cranberry bread hard to get to, and I'm going to make the healthy snack bin easy to get to. Perfect. Right? It's just about setting up your environment to support you in those weaker moments. Right? And to help keep those things from happening. Right? But aside from that, this is all interesting. So this question, what does stress lead us to make poor diet choices for, is, it has to do with the ultimate purpose of stress originally, like I alluded to. Stress is to help us run from the tiger. How many tigers are chasing us anymore? Yeah. The stress and pressure of the current world is leading to a large amount of ill health. And it's not the kind of stress we ever had ancestrally. This is a new thing, right? Our communities and society right now are very different from the small, interconnected, close-knit communities of the past. And if you looked at some of those traditional societies, they did a lot of work. They were moving around a lot and everything like that, but they also were really good at sitting back and relaxing and being social and making things. And so the things we don't do anymore. So we don't have as much support like that, especially in Western individualistic societies. So where stress originally results in the release of adrenaline, cortisol to create certain changes that allow us to run from the tiger, chronically activating those causes problems in a few ways. You might actually be expecting me to talk about dopamine right away or something like that when it comes to the depression aspect, but I'm going to wait on that. There is a little bit of that, but I'm actually going to take a road less traveled on this one. So first, cortisol causes the release of sugar into the blood from glycogen so that you can fuel muscles for a fast getaway. So chronic elevation of stress is going to contribute to insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome over time. If you're constantly pumping sugar into the blood, your body is going to start ignoring it, right, because it doesn't need it. Like technically, your body's like, I don't really need that right now. I'm not running. Like if you were to have a fight or flight response and then go out and run from a theoretical tiger, yeah, then you're gonna clear it all out. It'll be fine. Right. But we don't. We sit at our desk. We're not using any of that sugar that comes into our blood. So to reduce cortisol and get out of this, your brain starts requesting carbohydrates to help it make serotonin. That's a temporary fix. Okay. So that's one of the countermeasures that happens naturally. So you've got this chronic elevation, you've got this sugar going in. Now you've got this carbohydrate craving to try to reset. Now, in order to deal with the stress and the sugar, your body actually needs magnesium. This is coming back to the micronutrient thing. If you're eating a lot of carbohydrates and are under a lot of stress, you're going to be depleted in magnesium, because magnesium is involved in over 300, processes in your body. One of them is processing cortisol, making melatonin, and also processing sugar. It's actually really required for insulin sensitivity in your cells. It's one of the key movers in your cells for responding to insulin.
Wow.
Okay, so if you're depleted in magnesium, which according to studies most of America is, probably because our lack of sleep, high stress, and high sugar. Without magnesium, you now have problems sleeping because you're not making melatonin. You're having muscle cramps and heart palpitations because that's also a key electrolyte involved in our nervous system. You're less able to clear cortisol because that requires magnesium. And if you drink to relieve stress, well, now you're depleting your magnesium further because you require magnesium to process alcohol. So now you're impacting sleep even further from the alcohol itself. And what happens when you have poor sleep? Your cortisol actually goes up. So they compound each other. It's a vicious cycle. It's a positive feedback cycle in the science world, right? But lack of sleep also affects the endocannabinoid system in your brain. So the effects of poor sleep give you the munchies. Yes, those munchies. Your hunger and satiety hormones become off and dysregulated. So your body will produce more ghrelin after poor sleep, which is your hunger hormone, and less leptin, which is your satiety hormone. And then what do you crave? Crave carbohydrates, comfort food, sugar, salt, and fat, refined grains that give you a fast sugar hit. And guess what? You get more insulin resistant. And it also affects your brain and your mood, increases irritability and anxiety because lack of sleep. We all know what that day feels like afterward. Right. And all of those things are frequently experienced along with depression. So this is just like a big, huge, this is probably the one thing that causes the imbalance the most. And that's why I say it's not just food and exercise or whatever. That stress can really derail all of your best efforts. You've got a lot of really great efforts going on in it, and you were derailed, right?
I didn't sleep well.
And yeah. Did you sleep all right last night?
No. That's why I was like 5 minutes late for this. I was like, I was behind. Yeah.
You didn't even tell me that part, and I could have told you. You didn't sleep well, did you?
You're right.
So, and if that wasn't enough, when it comes to depression, these comfort foods also give you a dopamine hit, right? So that's temporary, but it's better than feeling bad or stressed and depressed in the time. So all of this is in a physiological attempt. All of your body trying to tell you to do these things is an attempt to bring your body back into parasympathetic rest and digest mode, out of sympathetic fight or flight mode. And newer theories talk about the vagal system and those types of things. These might be more accurate, but the average person, it's really just a nuance. The essence is the same, but there's such a temporary fix, and we have all of this availability that never was in our environment before. So our bodies they just fly out of balance. And it's especially because of the way our grocery stores are structured and what's convenient to us. So John Berardi, he's one of the founders of precision nutrition. It says the first law is, if you have unhealthy food in your house, you'll eat it. And the corollary to that law is, if you have healthy food in your house, you'll eat it.
Well said.
Right. So one of the things that I work on with my clients is let's just make the food that doesn't serve you harder to get than the food that does.
Brilliant, Lisa.
Brilliant. I am just absolutely amazed. I feel like there's always the information of eat healthier and do better for yourself. But then it's like, that is so broad and general, and it's not actually helping make that actionable change that I want to see. And, we've looked at how food and nutrition intake interacts with beliefs and myths, the food industry, and also stress and psychology and how we think about what we're eating and what's available to us. And so, part of what you do with your clients, you work with busy women to develop health and better nutrition through lifestyle-based strategies. And so, part of our Mindset Monday is offering an audience a way to grow their mindset or perspective through actionable change. And so you mentioned this a little earlier, but can you talk us through your BOSS framework?
Yes. So let's jump into that. So many people who are trying to lose weight are going to look for a program, right, that tells them what to eat, when, give them a schedule, workout plan, recipes, books. And I get why, right? We're busy. We're told to lose weight for a surgery or stay off meds, or doctors will give a handout and they don't really have the time to help their patient implement those types of changes. It's not like doctors are, there are some out there that maybe just aren't the best, but a lot of them, they want their patients to be healthy, right? And a lot of times patients are non-compliant with medication, let alone these nebulous lifestyle changes, right? There's so much information out there, like how we opened with, people don't know where to start, and most are too busy to do the research, and they can't tell what's right or wrong. Good information hype, is it this or that? What flexitarian, ketotarian, carnivore, what should I do? So I don't use a program per se. I use a method, and it's a method that allows you to implement any kind of lifestyle change you want. I work with what's called full spectrum health, which is physical, mental, emotional, environmental, occupational, social, and spiritual. All of those things are aspects of your health. There's 7, which is why I call it full spectrum. But no one's time with me looks the same at all, right? So I'll usually work with, at nutritional foundations, right? Because that's the underpinning of everything, like we just talked about. Your body cannot do anything without the building blocks, or if there's a fire in the house, right? But the basis of Boss Mode framework for behavioral change is based in neuroscience and principles of goal achievement. There's a double entendre here, because the whole point of my program is to empower you to be the boss, that CEO, the chief executive officer, the chief operating officer, the chief scientific officer of your own health and wellness, and to teach you how to do that using the Boss framework. So of course I created an acronym that followed that. But the first thing is mindset, right? Belief is the first B. Reforming limiting beliefs and expectations for how change happens, because it's rarely a lightning bolt moment, and we're conditioned to want a quick fix. We want to lose 30 pounds in 30 days, right? And it sounds great. We want to be able to, take a pill, and maybe a pill can be great as a starter, but that's not a lifestyle change. So if I'm still eating a whole bunch of ultra processed food while I'm taking a pill, I'm not healing myself at all, right? I'm not learning how to not be on a pill, right? So change happens in slow baby steps. You want to be ready, willing, and able. But neuroplasticity, as well as physical adaptation in your biology, your cellular systems, requires about 2 weeks to get a foothold, right? So that's what I learned in the lab. It was like literally 2 weeks. And, that's why when you're on a drug like an SSRI and they start you low, and then you have to keep increasing your dose, because your brain, there are neurons in your brain, when it's actually stopping you from uptaking serotonin, your brain goes, oh, shoot, I need to make more receptors for the serotonin. So your body's constantly working against that. That's neuroplasticity, right? It takes about 2 weeks for those changes to happen. So we make one small change at a time to establish a neural pathway of a habit. All right. And, it's like what I was talking about with the biggest challenge, to change is mindset and how people believe about dieting. I kind of touched on that at the beginning. We start here. What was really happening throughout the program, because the Boss method is a cyclical process. So we're always coming back to beliefs and assumptions, and understanding that it is probably best to not lose more than 1 or 2 pounds a week. And so it could take you over a year to get to your goal weight or more if you've got a long way to go. And some people are really frustrated with that, but guess what? It stays off when you do it that way, right? So the second part of the Boss Mode framework is this idea, I call it a blueprint, but it's your goal mapping blueprint. It's your personalized plan. These are the steps in your journey. You have a goal. You need to develop skills to reach the goal. Just like riding a bike, it takes practice. There are small actions that help you practice that skill of riding a bike. There's usually multiple skills to reach the goal. And it's like, or learning how to drive a car. You need to, pay attention to so many things at once. And eventually it just becomes second nature. And this is what we want to do with your lifestyle. We want it to just become something you don't even think about. So you have to go slow and steady and create new habits. It's really like, think about a highway. It's so much easier to get on a highway and get where you're going. And when you're trying to do something new, it's more like taking a machete and bushwhacking through the weeds in a forest. There's no path. So you have to go slow to create that path, but and make it easy to go down that path. Okay. So we do this slow and steady. Our brains and bodies don't do well with big drastic changes most of the time. Some people that can work for when there's a very strong motivating factor, but that's not most of us. So every couple of weeks we add a new element. And ultimately what we're doing is habit stacking. So here's an example. I think Whole30 is great for some people. Okay. But to make all of those changes and adjustments at one time and then implement them all for 30 days, it's highly stressful and difficult. If someone wants to do a Whole30 with me, for example, I would say, yeah, that's going to take 12 weeks to even implement, and then you're going to do it, right? It's going to take, for all of the 8 steps that they have, it's going to take us time, and then you're going to have about 30 days, and then we're going to work on a reintroduction very slowly. But they're going to have a good experience with that, and they're going to be more likely to keep the important lifestyle changes in place, right? But doing it for 30 days, what is that doing for you? It's and it goes into that temporary mindset.
But you'll relapse eventually. I mean, change is slow, and one has to maintain, the gains.
Right, and to maintain the gains, you want your brain to just create that new path. It's just becoming the default. You just need to make it so it's the default. So there's very much neuroscience here when we're talking about changing your lifestyle. And it's a very methodical process. So then the O, so we've got BB, right? So boss. Oh. And we've got our O, so obstacles. We need to anticipate and address obstacles and challenges. So we come up with a plan and shape your path to make it easy for you. And this is why I tell people, don't be optimistic. We need to be realistic here. There is a book by the Heath brothers, Chip and Dan, called Switch, which is how to change things when change is hard. And it's incredible, but the principles are incorporated in this step. So you can want something in your conscious brain. That's your rider, the rider of the elephant. Your emotional self is the elephant. The rider is small. The elephant's big. If an elephant really wants to go some way, how successful do you think you're going to be? So one of the things you need to do is shape the path to make it easy for the elephant to go the way you want them to go, right? That's kind of this idea of willpower, right? You want to make it easy. So if I want to start doing yoga, I'm going to shape the path by putting a mat up in my bedroom instead of buried in my trunk. I'm going to pick out a YouTube playlist and have it all set up, make sure my Chromecast is plugged in. I'm going to put a reminder in my phone when I want to start. I'm going to make it easy for myself. For you, don't have the cranberry bread next to you, right? Instead, have a small pack of nuts. Maybe you've got little nut, or something that is a better choice for you to have right before bed. That's not going to cause you to increase your insulin right before bed, which also blocks melatonin production, and then causes a blood sugar dip while you're sleeping, which causes your cortisol to go up while you're sleeping, and then causes midnight waking, or around 2 a.m. usually. That whole cycle. Let's give you something, a better choice. Let's make it easy for you to choose the better thing when you're in the midst of that stress, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's obstacles. Then we've got science. Put on your lab coat. I think everybody's a scientist, whether we want to be or not. You don't have to go to school to be a scientist of yourself. You get to be your chief scientific officer. You get to observe, analyze, and determine your next action. Your blueprint's a guide, right? But it's data that gives us a dynamic blueprint. Were you able to do that one thing 90% of the time? Did you notice anything negative? Were you getting the results you were expecting? Was it too easy? Do you want to make it harder? Was it too hard? Do you need to make it a little easier? Are you ready to move on to your next action, your next practice for your skill? We change one variable at a time, like good scientists. And then we can know if it's enough or too much if we need to pivot, right? So this is all cyclical. So every 2 weeks, you're like looking at it and you're saying, how did it feel? Sometimes what you have to work on is the mindset aspect and being kind to yourself. You didn't fail. You learned that something was harder than you thought. So now you get to make a decision. And what would you tell your child if they did, oh, it's okay. We're just going to do this instead. When your child falls off their bike when they're trying to learn to ride, do you yell at them? Do you call them a failure? No, you don't. So we have to love ourselves. We have to really take this whole idea of failure out of it, because all you did is learn a thing about yourself. And then the last S is support. So we really need to buddy up with someone for a high accountability. For me, it was my neighbor and one of my best friends. You could hire a coach. You can have both. You can have a community that you belong to that are all doing something together. But checking in so that you have support in your daily actions, put it in writing. There's actually been a study there's a couple of studies that show things regarding goal achievement. One is that just writing it down and articulating it, you're somewhat more likely to complete it. But the most successful out of the 5 categories were those who told someone, checked in with them on a regular basis, and had small actions, broke it down, had a kind of a plan in place. They were way more successful in reaching a goal. Another study of students showed that when others are achieving goals, when they're actually community and talking to each other and they see other people successful, they're more likely to achieve their goals. It's a contagious effect of goal achievement, right? So I have a Facebook group, but I also have a group coaching program where people can support each other and be encouraged by each other. So that's BOSS. We've got, belief, blueprint, obstacle, science, and support.
Brilliant.
Yeah. And I do have a, a guide, I call it Goal Crusher Guide, that I'm offering. I've pulled it out, to offer as a free guide that goes through the Boss Method, with anybody here. And in that, there's a little link for a half price session with me, to kind of do a mini blueprint, for a single goal. So just to get people a little bit, just thinking about it, a little intro into that way of thinking.
I'm just amazed by how much effort you've put not only into helping others with their mindset, informing us and our audience, but also that we just don't put enough of this energy into our food and health, things that are going to last us for our whole life. We put a lot more time and attention into other things, into maybe our work, into our careers, but the time investment that we need for our food and nutrition is something worth doing. And I hope to share this with my college friends, with people my age, and to start implementing this earlier and this boss method so that we can take these skills, when we move into our own apartments and maybe we're not sure where to get started with our eating. And I'm absolutely going to be checking out your boss framework. This is like a brilliant plan.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I know I have, and I wanted to mention this, because starting September 5th, I actually have my fall session of my 6-week wellness intensive called Keys to Energetic Health. And this does the first couple of steps. So it's education, right? So we only touched on some very, very light things here today as far as that's concerned, but I go into more depth on how our body works. And then throughout the program, we're looking at the various action steps on how to implement all those things. And at the last week, we actually put together a personalized energetic health plan. And honestly, by the end of it, you could literally have well over a year's worth of 2-week actions set up for yourself. And it also comes with, some personal one-on-one calls with me, and a free ticket to our fall workshop once my kitchen's finished. Cook once, eat 3 times, 3 ways.
Wow.
So that is, and I've made that very affordable because I just want people to be empowered and educated to be the boss of their health, because I just don't, the coaching programs are fantastic, and there's always opportunity for that when if but some people can take this information from Keys to Energetic Health and that's all they need. They just needed to understand what was going to be right for them. And then they're like, okay, I got this. Right.
I'm just amazed. And we compiled a list of resources from Dr. Chandra, from you, and I'm going to put that all in the description, links to your website, links to the framework, and also some of the books you recommended. I absolutely think our audience needs to read through these resources and use what they think they need just to inform themselves. But I want to thank you so much for your time. And we have learned so much in this session. And, I can't imagine how much more we'll learn from future, resources from you and your workshops. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and I would just add that your analogies are brilliant. I mean, you're a fantastic educator and coach. You know the research, you have a great framework, and then you also teach just so well with these analogies. Just you're the whole package. Really wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Really, I want people to have health freedom. I really do. I want them to be able to have the impact on the world that they can have when they have their energy and their health, and be who they need to be for their families and their friends and their whatever they want. Right. And I feel like we're all in shackles right now. And so thank you so much for your kind words and having me here.